Yeah, my journey, it's a kind of a cliche journey. I wasn't the healthiest kid growing up, and I realized that food had a certain amount of power to improve my quality of life, allow me to be happier, feel better day to day. And then naturally, I fell into a career that helped people with the same problems that I kind of took a roundabout path on. So I guess like my main mission is to help people, rather than go in circles with their health, to kind of take, as straight of a line as one can take,
Were
all things
you
considered.
were you going in circles in your past?
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, it took me a long time to arrive at, at a place where I was like really at peace with food, kind of, yeah, and
Okay.
eating in a way that was truly optimal for me. I think, yeah, definitely was a roundabout path, and if I had spoken to a dietitian, perhaps, like, not that that even crossed my mind. That's probably part of the problem, is that people don't even realize, right? That's the other issue. If I had had help, I would have probably saved myself a lot of waste of time. I mean, obviously, ultimately, you learn lessons down that road, but I
Yeah,
think, yeah,
it motivates you to serve nowadays to prevent people from going through some of your experiences.
yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. That's my motivation. I mean, helping people, obviously, is extraordinarily rewarding. You don't need me to tell you that. And yeah, I mean, and I write and I do social media and I do private practice and I do all the activities I can to reach as many people as possible. Among my modest following. But I find writing, to your point, prolific writer. I like that. I like that description. I gotta use that one for
Well, I
myself.
resonate a lot with
Uh,
your background and so forth because I mean, I feel like therapists, I don't have a background in nutrition. I'm not an RD, but I went to school for therapy. And so many therapists go to school for therapy because there's something either broken in them or that needs healing. I feel like the same as with
right.
dietetics.
Yeah,
It can be,
there's
there can be.
there's something to that for sure. I mean, there's something to that for sure. That does sound like I think it's human nature on some level to be drawn towards things like that. I mean, you do hear these. That's why I said my story was cliche. I mean, you hear stories like mine a lot. What the actual numbers are, the right when the motivations are, people's life experience. I mean, that's obviously hard to quantify. Someone should do a study on that or something. But you know,
I know I'm
but
at an eating
yeah,
disorder center right now. That's my like part-time job. And
right.
a lot of the dietitians I ask them, hey, why'd you come here? And they say like, well, I used to kind of, be a little obsessed with food or, whatever, and or struggled with an eating disorder themselves and stuff like that. So yeah, I think
Right.
it's pretty common. And then of course I'm a
Yeah.
writer too. Like I love writing.
Right.
Sometimes people say, you got to go do this or that. I'm like, no, I'm just going to write.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Writing is my solution for most, like, my solution for most problems. Don't know what to do, right? Don't feel great on any given day. Oh, writing will help with that. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
you've written three
Yeah.
books, you've written a lot of blogs, and you've done placements at a bunch of different places for
Right.
dietetics. I'm really curious about some of your principles about how you approach health with your clients and what you recommend to the listeners.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, well, I think first and foremost that when you're talking with someone, you're speaking to someone, you have to appreciate that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work with someone else. I mean, I definitely have overlapping principles. I mean, one of them, if you have to capture it right now, would be thinking about your, and not to get too specific, but just to make it constructive, thinking about protein intake and the distribution between plant and animal sources. That's definitely something I try to discuss with clients all the time. But what that looks like for a specific person is very, very different, depending on the foods they like, what they're doing right now, and so on and so forth. But, I think the most important thing is to understand where someone's at, what motivates them, what hasn't worked for them in the past, and kind of where they want to be compared to where they are. And when you understand those things, and you have the right level of, empathy and expertise, you can do good things for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's so important to have that empathy to have that connection with them because yeah, there's so much information out there and it's hard to get in and empathy helps. When you
Yeah.
when you talk about the protein stuff, like let's say, do you have a range? Is it a range like 20% of your diet should be protein or 40% or it depends on the person or is everyone at 40% or 30%?
Yeah, so what I was referring to is even more, not even about the absolute amount of protein, which is definitely a relevant consideration. And I think the percentage is one thing, but it also can depend on someone's body weight and their activity level and sort of stuff like that. And then that might mean it varies from 0.8 grams per kilogram to 2 grams per kilogram, and there's these ranges. But what I'm actually even more interested, obviously for the right person, you're going to talk about those numbers. But what I'm even more interested in is the distribution of where that protein is coming from, because traditionally, it's always, for most people, they're raised beef, chicken, stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that, by the way, right? Nothing wrong with that at all. But it's what about the other sources of protein? Where do those fit in? Because generally speaking, it's the stuff like fish, nuts and seeds, legumes that brings a lot more to the table nutritionally, or at the very least, it brings different things to the table nutritionally. So that is my main topic of interest with a lot of my clients.
Interesting. So you're talking like about how basically diversifying your protein sources so that you can get either the appropriate amount and not just coming from beef and chicken and meats and so forth.
Right. I think besides eating more vegetables, which I think is like, usually the goal.
Everyone always hears that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want a more creative answer to the question, like what do I tell most people? I ask them to together, let's evaluate your protein intake, and let's see if we can shift it on the spectrum a little bit. And that ends up being a conversation that is relevant to all but the most savvy people who are already like on point in that area.
Yeah. And so what are like some of the benefits of having more protein? I mean, I think people know, generally speaking, I mean, maybe people don't, but I mean, generally speaking, protein helps you build muscle and keep you full longer.
Right. Essentially, I mean, look, yes, the metabolic and physiological effects, so it keeps you more full. It actually requires more energy to break down than carbohydrates or fat. And yeah, you need a certain amount of protein to sustain, a certain amount of physical activity in terms of muscular development, recovery, and all that stuff, right? 100%. That's very true. I think there's different levels of protein intake, right? There's the bare minimum to make sure you're functional, that your immune system is okay. You're not going to be ill because you don't have enough protein. And then beyond that, you get into more strategic uses of it. I mean, for the satiety effect, for the muscle building effect. And then of course, what I mean? And what I'm talking about is where are we getting it from? You know what I mean? What's the distribution? With what frequency are you getting from this source versus this source? Because, as you can imagine, a lentil versus a piece of steak, they are both sources of protein and iron, but that's where the similarities end. You know what I mean? They're very, very different foods. And it's more likely someone is lacking. Now, again, this depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
But if I was to just wager on a random person I plucked from the street, it's more likely that a person's missing the nutrients from the lentils in their diet than they are missing the nutrients from the beef, just based on the inevitability of how most of us are raised around food. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something it's just a topic worthy of discussion.
Interesting. So, like, while people may need more protein depending on their goals and so forth,
right,
you're really coming from it from a complete nutritional standpoint. Like if you're just getting your protein from protein powder and chicken, and you might not even be getting enough protein, but if you diversify, you're going to either get more and you'll have these like other richer protein sources that have so what are these other nutrients in like the other, you mentioned legumes, you mentioned nuts, and I love these too. I think they're really important. Yeah, what are the other
Well, the big three for me is fish and seafood, nuts and seeds, and legumes, right? And so those three all offer something a little bit different. Fish, seafood, well, fish particularly has vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids, right? So I mean, these two nutrients are quite elusive in the diet. There are not that many foods that contain them. Okay, not a lot of foods have omega-3s, not a lot of foods have vitamin D. So if you're an omnivore and you don't eat fish, and there's a decent chance you might not be getting these nutrients. Now, they do come from other foods, like omega-3s is found in flaxseed, chia seed, walnuts, and so on, right? But that's only a couple of foods. It's very easy not to eat those foods. You know what I mean? And vitamin D is found in what? In fish, eggs, and some fortified products like milk products, and then some other fortified products. Not a lot of products. So right off the bat, it's very easy to miss out on those two nutrients if you don't have fish, for example.
Yeah, right? And I used to be a vegetarian myself. I some days consider going back to it, but vegetarian, vegan, I could easily be missing out on protein sources.
Yeah,
or the omega sources rather. Could be. And it depends on the person. I hear you there.
Right.
For vitamin D, does that come from the sun? I mean, I hear that people are deficient in vitamin D. Does that come from the sun too? I don't quite know.
Well, yeah, our bodies synthesize vitamin D from the UV rays now, but that will depend on a lot of factors. First of all, where you live. So here in Canada, my understanding is for about half the year, the sun rays aren't strong enough for us to make vitamin D. Yeah, and on top of that, if you're covered up, if you're wearing sunscreen, if you're not out in the sun in peak hours, you're not making that much vitamin D. You know what I mean? So and this is why even in Canada, our kind of governmental organization, Health Canada, I think they recommend everyone above the age, I think it's 50 or 55, supplement vitamin D.
I take a vitamin D supplement because I hear that so many people are deficient. And while I do have fish on the occasion and so forth, I'm curious too about how people can get more seafood in their diet. I mean, obviously cooking fish seems like the obvious thing, but maybe there's some other different ways as well.
Yeah. Well, the two things I would say is do not underestimate frozen food and don't underestimate canned food, right? I think it all depends on the person, but some people are averse. They think frozen foods are this or that. They think canned foods are this or that. Sardines, for example, right, which you can get canned, which you don't have to eat right out of the can. No one says you can't pan fry them and season them and make them, sizzle and make them taste good, right? No one says you can't do that. They're very economical. They're a very, very good source of omega-3 fatty acids. And so they're very underrated as an example, right? Frozen fish, also very economical. You can throw it in the oven at 400 Fahrenheit. You don't even have to thaw it the day before. You can go straight from frozen, cook it straight from frozen. Very convenient, very affordable. So, it doesn't always have to be fresh, wild caught, whatever it is. Like you can go to these more economical sources and you don't get any sort of deduction in terms of the nutritional value of what you're doing.
I love the idea about sardines. I mean, I can't even think what sardines taste like because it's been so long since I've had them. I mean, I know they go on pizza and stuff, but they're like salty, right? Or they're like, what when you buy a can of sardines, and I'm gonna try this out. I gotta try it out. But you pour it on the pan. Is it like little fish, or I sound so stupid, but what is it? What is it? Yeah.
Well, certainly they're little fish, and they're usually halves, right? Or depending on the product you're buying, right? They can there's a wide array of products. So they can come in all sorts of things: oil, water, salted, unsalted, flavored. But you have a frying pan. You can throw a bunch in, season them up with your favorite seasoning. Pan fry them till they're lightly crisp. And you have a nice little very economical source of fish. Yeah, I highly recommend that.
Sounds pretty good. Yeah.
For people who open a can of sardines and are like, ooh, like the smell, they don't. I understand that.
The smell. Yeah.
I understand that, but you pan fry it, you put it on a bed of some vegetables and some rice or something, and you're rolling.
Yeah, for sure, and maybe it's not for everyone. But you mentioned, that I believe nuts were it was like fish and
nuts and seeds.
And seeds. And it was interesting to me as I heard some of these. Sometimes I think about nutrition and like whole carbs, proteins, and then I also kind of think of it in healthy fats. And as I heard you talking about, the getting more protein sources, I heard that you were listing what I would think of as like healthy fats, like the nuts and so forth. Like when I think of a nut, I'm like, oh, that's a protein and a healthy fat.
Right. Yeah. But essentially, I mean, nuts have protein, they have fiber, and they have antioxidants, a wide array of vitamins and minerals, and they have uniquely healthy sources of fat. Walnuts have omega-3 fats, right? Flax and chia seed, which are seeds, obviously have omega-3 fats, and then stuff like almonds and the other sources of almonds. Almonds, pecans, pistachios, sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds. Those are more likely to contain monounsaturated fats and then some other types of fats as well. And then those are quite heart healthy. You know what I mean? They're quite good for us.
I'm reminded listening to you, like I knew in the back of my head that nuts were extraordinarily healthy and well and complete and amazing. And I'm just re-inspired to like eat more of them. Just as you said that, I already knew it in the back of my head. I'm like, okay.
They're a great snack food. They go well in all sorts of dishes. They can enhance, whatever. If it's oatmeal, if it's yogurt, if it's just as they are as a snack with a piece of fruit, something easy. So many
salads.
options. Yeah, a lot of people love nuts and seeds in salads.
Yep.
Also, yeah,
Yeah.
the sky's the limit. I mean, I highly support. Obviously, some people are turned off because they hear, oh yeah, they're calorically dense, they're quote unquote fatty, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's not really the best approach. I mean, yeah, certainly if you have a whole bag of pistachios, it could add up calorically, but you have to realize there is a lot of protein, there is a lot of fiber. You will feel satisfied after eating them, and you're getting so much nutritional value out of them, right? So you have to balance the concerns, which I don't think are really well founded about the calories, against the health benefits, and kind of reconcile those things and find a happy place where you can fit them in.
Yeah, let's explore this a little bit because this comes up for people like, because nuts, right? There's this
Right.
fear of weight gain, and I'm so curious. I love what you said about, oh, nuts are high calorie, and maybe people would say that, I don't know, about olive oil or avocados or
Sure.
whatever, certain foods that are basically really good for you, but people are
Right.
afraid of this weight loss or the weight gain. Um, and you mentioned a few things. You said they're going to satisfy you. What else did you say? Like, how do you talk to someone who's afraid of eating these healthy foods?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, well, you have to outline the benefits, and you have to help them understand why for them it makes sense, right? So, that depends on them. That depends on their goals. That depends on what their daily life looks like. It depends what their challenges are. And in most cases, it's pretty easy for, a dietitian like myself or any other experienced dietitian to help a person understand
Mm,
why this food at this time in this context is exactly what you need,
mm.
right? So the reasoning for that will vary depending on the person. For example, if someone has high cholesterol, nuts are strongly associated with reducing cholesterol. There's the motivation there, and then the list just goes on.
What if you're an athlete?
I mean, if you're an athlete, I mean, the caloric component is even less relevant because you're presumably you're expending so much energy. So you can afford to eat
What
properly
about the
liberally.
average? What about the average, let's say, mom who is concerned about weight gain?
Right. Well, you need something that is going to, keep you full. That's going to make you feel good, and that's going to not want you going to grab something else, right? Because yeah, you could have X amount of calories of nuts that keep you quite full and nourish you, or you could have less calories of something that doesn't make you full, and then you're going to be hungry again later. You know what I mean? And that's just like a quick example, and then obviously there's more layers to it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's just an example
I
there.
with it's this is such a huge thing in helping people with binge eating. I used to struggle with binge eating as a wrestler. There was a lot of calorie deprivation, and
Oh yeah.
I didn't really struggle as much just back then with the whole weight gain thing. It was more like it was a little bit different mentality. But I run into a lot of people who, I to overcome binge eating, you got to eat more nuts. I mean, in a nutshell,
Sure.
uh, you got to eat more regularly. You got to eat more of these nuts and so forth. You got to eat more regularly. And
Right.
sometimes there's this fear, like, if someone overeats, well, they're like, well, mentally beating the shit out of themselves.
Of
And they're
course.
like, well, I got to eat less because I just overate. Like, it's this vicious cycle. And
Yeah.
it messes with people because they think their perception becomes off. You know what I mean? Like, they're
Yeah.
like,
Like
I
yeah.
just
Those
overate. Yeah.
those cognitive distortions that you know what I mean. Those
Yeah.
you get to that whole world where people don't have necessarily the healthiest way to view their own behaviors and how they interact with food. Of course that happens. That's more common than I'm sure either of us would like.
For sure. Yeah. And you
You know,
mentioned one more food group. And so let's close out this principle and maybe we have time
legumes.
for one more. Yeah. After this.
Yeah.
But yeah, legumes.
Yeah, I mean, look, legumes are, there's no food that contains as much fiber and protein in the same place as a legume does. Okay. So that's already off the bat. That's like
Huh.
that's a very unique and wonderful combination because we just finished talking about the importance of fiber and protein. And then the list goes on from there, antioxidant, vitamins, minerals, potassium, magnesium. These are important nutrients for many people, especially given how common like high blood pressure is. The high fiber content of legumes are very low glycemic index, which means they're quite suitable for people perhaps who are living with diabetes or pre-diabetes who are trying to get their blood sugar under better control. And then it just goes on from there. And yeah, they're a great, yeah,
Mm.
they're just a great complement to, a meal. They can be used and they're versatile. They can be used as the base of a meal, right? Perhaps a rice, you can have a rice and lentil blend, right? Or they can use as a protein source for a meal. If someone's a vegetarian or a vegan, you rely on them in that way. So, I mean, it's just the value. And then across the board, people who eat more legumes tend to have better health outcomes, which just should be
Absolutely.
unsurprising. You know what I mean? So,
do you personally boil them? Do you buy them hard, or what do you do? Do you
myself personally, yeah, I generally only eat lentils, tofu, and tempeh from like the legume group of foods. So I actually don't like other legumes, and I boil them just because I don't mind to do so. But there's no big deal if someone wants to buy them canned. Obviously, the issue you find with canned is you have to be wary of the sodium content. So you want to buy a lower sodium variety. You want to rinse it. Other than that, you're good to go.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And I like that you qualified it, like saying, hey, I do this, but you don't need to.
Right.
Making it more accessible. Appreciate that.
Yeah, 100%. And just to that point where I was talking about the sardines, hey, pour some lentils and some sardines, get some lemon pepper seasoning, pan fry them. You got a wonderful meal there. You know,
absolutely
affordable, cheap.
And you mentioned, I think this principle applies. I'm going to give you a curveball here. Okay.
Sure.
You're a prolific writer. How does that, what principle is behind your prolific writing, and how does that translate into people's, I'm sure the same principle of writing can be used in someone's health journey. So what gets you writing, and how does that help someone apply it to health?
Yeah, I mean, okay, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, for me, writing has been something I like since I was a teenager. So I can't even pretend and say, oh, I sucked at it, and I put all this work in. I know, yeah. Look, I'm not saying I'm not the most proficient writer grammatically. I can't tell you how to use a comma for my life, but I know how to put words together in a compelling way. I think anyway.
I'm pretty sure the comma goes at the end of the sentence. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it, right? Don't ask me how to use a semicolon, because I'm sure I use it incorrectly, and I could probably remedy that easily. But the thing is, I can't be bothered to. But that's not a good habit. Don't apply that to nutrition principles. But my writing actually isn't largely. I actually wrote a blog about what inspires my writing, and it's largely inspired by my clients or people. Or the people around me. So if I sense a common theme, a common area of concern around me, I act on it through my writing. And I also pursue my own personal interests and professional interests through my writing. So if you were to translate that to someone's nutrition goals, well, you have to find it does parallel, because you're finding the reasons for those around you. Now, so for example, let's say you have family members who are concerned about your health. It has to be positive, right? It's not because your friend made some offhanded comment, but it has to be the right type of inspiration. Yeah. So let's say your family's concerned about maybe they've been concerned for years, and you finally hits you. You know what I mean? It's not just about you, but then it also is about you, because you want to feel better. You feel like you're not your most energetic self. So then you come from that perspective. So, I mean, if you want to draw a parallel, I suppose that would be it. I
got you. Yeah. It seems like you place a lot of emphasis on a vision, or, each person has a different goal, a different thing that resonates with them. That seems to be important to how you understand health.
Yeah, I mean, commitment is one of the words I chose for your question.
Yeah.
Commitment, not perfection, but commitment, right? So commitment comes to mind because, yeah, I mean, when you're, no matter, this obviously applies to writing, but it applies to nutrition as well. I think there is a level of commitment involved to, changing your habits or pursuing new foods, being committed, for example. So it's not about being committed to being perfect or being committed to not having the foods you like, but being committed to trying new things, being committed to buy into the advice of a professional who you're entrusting. You know what I mean? Being committed to doing things differently than you've done before because what you did before didn't work for you. Things like that. So that word comes to mind for sure. Being committed to show up to a follow-up appointment if you're working with a doctor, stuff like that. You know what I mean? Whatever, and obviously that applies to writing, because writing can be thankless at times. It doesn't always pay off right away. So commitment above all else. You have to believe it. You have to have faith in what you're doing. You know what I mean? You have to believe in what you're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And balance it out with, I don't know what, but it seems like you were also talking about personal satisfaction when you were writing. You loved this as a kid, you loved writing and so forth. I feel like commitment, it's really important it's so important, right? It's so important. Commitment. Right. I love that word. I want to hear the rest of your words too. But also I feel like, for example, maybe a really strict diet would tell someone, you got to commit. I mean, and I loved your qualification too, because you
Right.
said this isn't about not eating the foods you don't want, or you said it wasn't about like making yourself miserable, basically. That's how I
Right.
understood it.
Right.
How important is it to balance commitment with like personal satisfaction or some sort of connection to it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think those are mutually exclusive terms, right? But it depends on the person. Like, it depends so much on someone's path and where they're at. And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's such an individual question on in terms of what commitment, the word commitment. I mean, obviously, if we're going
I
for the one
see.
word, right? Like what that looks like for a different person. So, I don't have a baseline philosophy that I apply across the board from that perspective. Like, I'm really mostly concerned with seeing where someone's at, understanding where they want to be, and then understanding how they want to get there. That's also important, right? Because you have a goal, but then you also have an expectation of how you intend to get there. Some people are of the personality, they go all in 100%. That's the way they operate. They need to be told what to do to the T. And I respect that. So I'm not going to try and tell that
Uh,
individual to take a laissez-faire approach. Just like I'm not going to apply a militant approach to someone who is
Interesting.
more laissez-faire in the way they operate.
Huh.
So this is why the individual autonomy is so important, and
Interesting.
why it's so hard to answer that kind of question generally across the board.
That's like, I love that you're really coming back to this fluidity or this flexibility. I appreciate that.
Right.
It reminds me of like I hear in judo or something when someone like punches you and you take that energy and you like send it
Right.
back to the person. You're like really working with the person where they're at. Uh,
Minus when you throw them down at the end, though, right?
Amen. What are
Unless they need it.
what are some other words of yours? I'm really curious.
Well, I picked. Let me open my document here. I picked kale as one of them because kale's my favorite food, and
It is.
it's come to kind of like embody a little bit of my personal identity and my professional identity, because like a lot of my clients very often will find me on social media, and they all see I have a lot of kale inspired posts, and then they'll come to my office and they'll see I have a clock that has a kale clock, and I
My
got
God.
kale candy canes, and then I'll ask them, but what are your favorite vegetables, and they'll say, I'm sorry, I don't like kale, because they know about me already, right? So and so it's like, it's come to represent me on some level. And right,
I
I think
love
yeah,
that. I
yeah.
love it. Yeah, no. How does it? Yeah, it represents you.
Well, no, and then you can go deeper with it, right? It's also like a metaphor that it's okay to have a favorite, like, because in a world where it's always about eating what you should rather than what you want to, and that you should always have all this variety, that it's okay to have a favorite food, and it's okay to eat your favorite food every day. Kale happens to genuinely be probably my favorite thing. Now that's a bit weird, right? But your favorite food might be something else, and that's cool. And I think, like, if you want to dive in, not that I necessarily think about it metaphorically on this level, but
I
I can
love
make
the
that.
metaphors, dude.
Yeah,
I love going meta, man. Like,
yeah. I
yes.
can. I can. No, I feel like I'm creative enough to play that game, and 100%. Like, if you want to draw that metaphor, 100%. Like, that's there to be drawn. You know what I
Interesting.
mean? So that's why I picked kale as a word.
Interesting. It's kind of like
Yeah.
embracing your unique flavor food preferences and
Yeah, 100%. If you like chips, which I do, and I have a bag of chips back there. If you like chips, who's to say that chips are not a part of your daily routine, or they can't be?
huh.
And that's on the opposite side of the spectrum. Or if you like chocolate or whatever it is, right? Like,
Yeah.
you have to honor, like, kind of who you are, and the food
Yeah.
and the foods that kind of represent who you are and that give you that bit of joy, right?
Uh,
So
uh,
yeah, that's very important to me as well. I'm always curious to know.
huh.
I almost always ask my clients what their favorite foods are,
Interesting.
and they always ask me, "Oh, do you mean healthy food?" I mean, no, it could be, but I just kind of want to know whatever they are. I want to know,
Uh,
because and not even because I'm going to tell them not to eat it, just so I know. I feel like I can understand them more as a person if I know those things, even if I don't act on it in any way. You know what I mean? So
no, I feel that that is so important. And I love how you're balancing sort of like what I would say, like the mind and the heart, right? Maybe like the mind was the nutrition and the legumes and so forth, and nuts and fish and
right.
protein sources, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're really bringing it to the heart level, which I feel is oftentimes missing. And I feel like this connection to food, your favorite, not from a health perspective, but what makes
Right.
you, you know,
100%. Yeah, we all have those foods, right? Whatever they are. I mean, obviously, like, I like a lot of foods that aren't healthy. Chips probably, like I said, chips being one of them.
What brand? What kettle chips? We talking?
Yeah, honestly, I like Miss Vicky's, and like not and like not even to even label them as unhealthy. I mean, it's
Yeah,
honestly, you
yeah.
you want to get away from these labels as much as possible. I don't think like labels are super constructive. Obviously, I mean, I know that's a theme that's propagated a lot, and I tend to agree with it. So yeah, I like chips. I mean, traditionally, they're not a superfood, obviously, but Miss Vicky's Terra chips, which are a little more expensive. Those are like the ones that have like random different starchy vegetables in them, like sweet potatoes and taro and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
For sure, for sure. I appreciate that. Even a healthy guy like you and sort of can have chips and also not take health too seriously, not take these
Yeah, if you see my Instagram, then if you haven't, just see I take health seriously, unseriously, so which I think is a good approach.
Yeah, where can people find you and yeah, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, my website's andythed.com. So just ANDYTHERD.com. So RD stands for registered dietitian. That's also my Instagram page. So Andy@AndyTheRD, or whatever it is, Andy the RD. So that's my blog and my Instagram are probably the two best places to go to get what I'm offering, basically.
And you have a funny slogan on your website too. It was I something like, I'm not the standard, and the last two words of standard, which are RD.
Yeah, that's a theme that's a theme through my whole
you
website.
did the RD thing. I'm not the standard RD. And I feel it. I feel that that's true. You're bringing a lot of heart and individuality to this. I love it. You've also written, 3 books, right? They're on Amazon, I'm assuming. What are they about?
I've got a bit more now than 3, but yeah, I've got a bunch of books on Amazon. And I've got
if someone were to check out your book on Amazon, like which ones do they check out?
Well, yeah, the best way to find me on Amazon, just type, my name is Andy DeSantis. So if you type in Andy DeSantis on Amazon, my books will come up. So my books I've got a low cholesterol cookbook, I've got a pescatarian cookbook, and all my books are of a similar theme. They start off with education and they follow up with recipes, right? So they're all of that same theme. So pescatarian, DASH diet, which is for blood pressure lowering, cholesterol. I've got one on intermittent fasting. I've got one on low sodium eating, and I mean, obviously, I've got one on acid reflux. I think that's all of them. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. So I'm gonna wrap up with this last question.
Sure.
And that'll be, what is your biggest eating enlightenment? Your biggest shift in perspective around food that you personally have experienced?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is shortly after I wrote my pescatarian cookbook, I actually ended up becoming pescatarian. So I'm someone who's had a lot of beef and chicken in my life, which is why I know that's how it is, right? And again, nothing wrong with that, but no, I've been pescatarian for quite a while now. Well, quite a while for me being like 6 months, 7 months. I'm enjoying it.
For sure. Cool. I love it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.